your vast experience. Oh, there we go. There's the recording. Your vast experience with our market. So we're really excited to have you here today. So as you can see, we are out on a beautiful patio that is sometimes sunny, sometimes about to rain. And we don't have the best audio, but we're going to plug you in and get you as loud as possible and share this on Zoom later with everyone. So thrilled to have you here. You should be able to share your slides. And again, if they're not able to read them exceptionally well, we're going to share them later. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Well, it's great to be here today. And actually looking at these pictures, I wish I was there in person. That looks like an amazing facility. I do want to go ahead and kind of walk you through a little presentation today, and really kind of talk about the importance of something that we deal with every day on both sides. So with that, let me kind of give you a little more tiny bit of detail on who we are and kind of what we do. We're really 4 separate companies, as kind of mentioned. We are the largest dedicated site selection firm in the world. So we're working with only private sector companies on that side of the house. We also work with EDOs and governments on the consulting side. We also have a thought leadership, putting out papers kind of maybe what the future of both holds. And then we give back through a foundation. This is a little bit about our site selection practice. And you might recognize these are a few of the companies we work with, anywhere from multinationals to nationals to kind of venture-backed startups that we work with. But it's a pretty good list. It's actually fairly small sample size of what we do globally, but I think gives you a feel. And you see in the upper right, the projects we work on all over, all 6 continents every year, and multiple projects in most countries and states. So let's get into this. So for our site selection practice, you know, they're out there. They need to grow. They have looking for sites. What are they thinking? What are they looking for in a location? Let's start by maybe talking about what the process is. At the best, there's no perfect location. So everything is a trade-off. And so to figure out how to trade things on and off, we got to have enough data to help us make that decision. So everyone has a process. This is our process in general. Really 4 big steps. We spend a lot of time with the company trying to understand what its goals are, what it wants to do, what it's trying to get out of this decision to build a new facility or take a new office space. Then we do a lot of assessment at all kind of different levels. Then we get into the part that most of you see when you're working with economic development. That's where we're actually on site. We're doing the due diligence. We're there in the community. We're making sure that everything we saw on the data makes sense and is a reality on the ground. And then one thing most people forget, but is very important when you're talking to companies, is compliance. You know, there's all kind of agreements, things discussed. How do we make sure all that gets recorded? Make sure that it's either, if it's a legal contract or incentives or legislation, that everything gets put down. And if you look to the far right, there's a lot of different aspects of the data. There's 7 major categories here. Some are more regional, but they all tie to a site. And the ones in orange that I kind of highlighted are even more so important and very specific to sites. And all these pictures you kind of see are actually from projects that we do. I just kind of snip them out on different projects here. And then this is kind of some of the data. So this is one with Albuquerque in it, looking at certain job titles across the top and really trying to leverage data to better understand the area here. It all comes down to kind of putting it in a final format, something that clients can understand, that people want to look at and have a good confidence in. And so besides the data that we talked about on the last couple slides, you see that there's all kind of things that kind of fit in: a general business climate, risk, and risk is very important. We'll come back to that in a minute. Access and infrastructure are huge, especially for sites and what you need to be doing there. And then there's things that you might not have thought of, and strategic fit is one that most people don't think, but it's very important. Does it make sense from a strategy for the company to be in that location? Does it make sense just not today, but in 5, 10, 15, 25 years from now? And then on the right side, you'll see, everything seems to go into some kind of box of kind of weighing sites and weighing communities against. So you look at the bottom, all those things that we're trying to weigh against in these big buckets, and these can break down into hundreds of data points in each of these. On the left side, they're all being weighted against your labor force, and talent, we all know, is huge these days. Real estate, which is the site, and then one-time costs, which is kind of an interesting one most people also don't think about. So you have so many factors going on, but at the end of the day, they're all weighted against each other, all put into some kind of graphic representation here. And real estate is a huge piece of this. Having sites that are ready to go, sites that don't have risk or de-risk it as much as possible, and on people's timeline is a big part of this process. So from here, it all becomes very site specific. We start very macro, making sure the community, the state are a good fit, everything works. But at the end of the day, we can't pull the trigger unless there is office space or a site or somewhere that the client's going to end up. So it becomes very site specific at that point. You can see some of these that we pulled where we're weighing options. The one on the left, this one's actually from Singapore, showing you that had a very specific point that we needed to be around. These are all the parks that you see on the right side that we were weighing against. And then we're looking, obviously, here more technology. This was IT worker density. And we're trying to take all those things and put it together. And this is maybe one of 50 or 60 maps that get created to understand that area and understand which site would work better. On the right is really looking at a mass transit example of us trying to really figure out where the workers would be in a mass transit situation. And the interesting thing I'll just note on this one is it's not only what there is today, but there's a dotted line on this one where we're taking all future options. So a lot of times it's just not what there, but what's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years gets baked into these equations for site selection. The big thing nowadays, and this is kind of a change over the last 5 to 10 years, is economic development is more now thought of kind of this integrated ecosystem. In the old days, EDOs did the business development piece of it. They thought their job was marketing and business attraction and expansion, which it still is. But they just kind of took it for granted that the workforce would be there. They just took it for granted that there would be a site when a client came. Nowadays, EDOs are kind of shifting back up into these economic foundations. And not that they should be the lead on everything, but they should be heavily involved and influencing all of these things. And so these are some typical ones we see up at the top: talent and education. There's a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation going on in communities. Transportation and infrastructure is big. And then once again, we're back at real estate and quality of place are all playing into those metrics. So the thought now is not that you're just a good economic development team, which really helps, but if you have a great product and you're a great economic development team, then that creates more job opportunities, creates these payroll and these impacts you want to have in the community. These impacts then end up as economic outcomes. You increase the prosperity, you have more opportunity for people, and then that goes back and usually gets funded into providing better foundations. More money, the more wealth you have in your community, more opportunities, the more you can put back into education, the more you can put back into infrastructure and into sites and making sure they're ready. And if it's kind of like a flywheel concept, the more you put into this, the better it gets and the more the community grows. So this is why economic development is really focused on things like real estate and industrial sites. No longer just relying on them to maybe be there and maybe not be there, but making sure that all their efforts at the end of the day, if they get an opportunity, that they don't lose it because they did not have a site ready to go and be a part of this process. This is just another way of looking at those same things, but thinking it more in who works on what. And so a lot of communities are, and these differ by different communities, but in general, what is the standalone economic development organization going to be responsible for? And then what partners and other people does it need? And I think a lot of you are part of that ecosystem there. You're in talent or education or innovation or some kind of development field or real estate. And so all that, if you get it working together and everybody cooperating into one of these collaborative ecosystems, it really makes you a top candidate for this kind of development. So let's talk about two big things in site selection and two things that tie directly to site development. So this is an annual survey. Area Development is a very well-known big magazine in the economic and development space. They do a survey of corporate execs every 2 years. And it's interesting because most people don't realize what it takes before they contact an EDO for a company really to look at this. So on this timeline, when companies decide they're going to spend 20 million, 200 million, $1 billion, it takes a little time to think that through. And so if you see the percentages, I always like to get where it tips over 50%. So for most companies, it takes 1 to 2 years just to collect the data they need and run it through all the processes inside their corporation to be in a position to make a decision. So think about that. 1 or 2 years, people have been working on this. Nobody else knows outside the company just to get the data they need. Then once they have it, you'll see here, usually 3 to 6 months is what it takes to make a decision on what communities or where our focus is going to be for this project. So you get 1 to 2 years just to get the data. You got 3 to 6 months to actually decide on the communities. And the last one will show you when they make a decision, it's usually 5 sites or less. So they've already cut down a huge piece of geography, either in the US or around the world, just down to 5 sites. And so at that point, that's when most EDOs or you in the community, if you're involved, start to feel the project. In the top right corner, you'll see that once they contact an economic development organization, it usually 30% of them are done in 6 months. So from the first hello to everything done, 6 months. That's moving pretty quick, but that's almost a third. 72%, 6 months to 12. So within a year, overwhelming majority of these companies have already gone through the whole process. So what's that mean to you? That means you got to move fast and be ready, because they've already spent either anywhere from 1.5 years to 2.5 years working on this. So when they're ready to go and they've got the corporate approval and they've got the approval to spend the money, then they're going to try to get this done as fast as they can. So if the site is ready and you've cut the time off that, it makes it even more important. The other big thing to think about is risk. And these days, unfortunately, risk has escalated all over the world. And risk is just not geopolitical, which we have to take into account in a lot of places, unfortunately. But there's risk all around the community. And a lot of that has to do with the site. The less we know about the site, the more risk that we see in the site. And as the risk goes up and up, then the site becomes less interesting to us. I think a big thing for people to understand is a lot of times there are big companies that have whole groups of people that work on this. But in most companies, and especially mid-sized companies and small companies, it's just someone who has another job in the company who got assigned to this, because they might only do one of these every 5 or 10 years. Are they going to build a facility? And so it could be a CFO, it could be an operations manager. And this is one of those things where risk becomes very important. They don't want to lose their job because they picked the wrong site. And so the less risk they have, the more assurance they're still going to be employed after this is all over. So risk is the other thing you can do to really help. So here are just some things about sites in particular. And here we're really focused on industrial and business parks. Is there's certain factors, and this is a lot of work you have to get done in advance, from building community partners to getting funding streams or development teams on infrastructure. Some do shell building programs or build to suit programs where they're already working on buildings in advance. But all of it is designed to be prepared to act fast. Because as you saw on the previous slides, Once they're ready to go, they're ready to go. And the faster they can get the deal done, the less risk, and the more they can move on and make this process actually produce results. Think about that whole time they're working on, 1.5 to 2 years, they're producing no revenue off this project or this idea. And then during the build, if they're going to go into a park and then build for the next 6 months to a year, that's also more cost and no revenue. So the quicker they can get going and producing some revenue to kind of start paying back all these costs is big in their minds. Another thing I'll let you think about is most people don't think about developers and what they're really looking for. They have things they like to see in a community and on sites in particular. And I'm not just talking developers locally that might be helping you build sites, but a lot of companies, they don't own their own facilities these days. They work with developers who come in and build them and lease them back to them. And they're trying to make sure that investment that they're making in your community is still going to be appreciating asset in years to come. So things are making sure that there's good infrastructure around it to keep it going, that there's covenants to kind of protect them on what type of buildings can be in there, are very big things they're definitely looking at. The other thing that a lot of people are doing now is certified sites. You hear a lot about. And certified sites are different in every state. Even some states have 3 or 4 different versions. Either power companies in them have their own version, or other government organizations or utilities. But in general, the more you can do on the site itself to take away the risk, the more you can know about the site, the better off you're going to be in site selection. So here's an example. On a certified, it's kind of all in. You've done everything and everything is ready. Everything is known as much as you can. And it's kind of at that point for development. Not every site can get there. So a lot of other organizations are kind of creating these kind of grades of site readiness. So this is one from another region, another state that we had worked with, where instead of being all certified or not, you can kind of get in one of these 3 buckets. The first one is what we call desktop, where you can just do it, just collecting data and make sure you have it. The second is where you really go beyond just the data and you start thinking about what a master plan would look like. What do you want there? Renderings of buildings that might be there, sizes of buildings, trying to bring that vision out. And then lastly is really would be considered a certified site. This is when you get into some very expensive pieces to it, from geotech reports to archaeology, wetlands. Phase 1 is always a big one that everybody has to do. So all of these kind of engineering reports come into play. All this is done to reduce the risk and the time it takes to get up and developed in a park. In addition to this, you've got to think about the neighborhood around the park. And so everybody's focused. Everything I just showed you there was inside the boundaries of the park. Now you got to think about, well, what's the neighborhood? Because when we do it, all those maps you saw are mostly drive time maps of where people live and what they do and what their specialties are. And so that is another big consideration. So not only do you have to do all that stuff on site, you got to do all this additional work off site. And the off site is heavily focused on labor these days and talent attraction. So here you can see some actual reports that we generate for our clients. You can see kind of the things we're looking at in and around the site. A lot of times this can be anywhere from a 30 to a 45-minute drive, sometimes up to an hour, depending on the location and how far people are used to driving. And then these are some additional ones. As I said before, a lot of kind of graphic represented reports that C-suite execs can take in and think about the area. But all of these are tied to a single point. It has to be a park that's ready to go in a very quick period and has as much de-risking to it as possible. Now, if that wasn't enough, there are other things constantly coming down that are kind of added to the process. A big one these days is ESG. And ESG, it gets kind of play, as everything does now, I think, in politics. But regardless if the community wants to do it or not do it themselves, the corporations need to do it. Almost all of the Fortune 500 have some kind of reporting on ESG. And if you're wanting to recruit internationally, especially from Europe, they're required to do a lot of ESG reporting. So if they're going to have to fill out their form and they're going to have to cover different things that you see listed on this slide here, and this is just a small sample of what might go into an ESG report. Some of these reports for corporations are like 60 or 70 pages long now. But if they're going to have to kind of start checking these boxes for where they're going to locate, then your site is going to have to collect that data so you can start helping them make the case that this is a good site and that will meet not only what they need in a plant or a facility and what they need in a workforce around the facility, but also what they need to kind of meet goals such as ESG. In the end, kind of circle back here to where we started, is when our clients are looking at your location, the two big things they're thinking about are time and risk. And so whatever you can do from any of these programs to better position a site just helps them make their job easier, makes our job easier, and it results in a great outcome for your community. So with that, I think, Danielle, you said you wanted a few minutes for questions. So at this time, I'd love to take some.
All right. Barry, are you able to hear me okay?
I am, yes.
Cool. All right. We're doing a little bit of like microphone by the microphone thing. So first of all, if anybody has a burning question for him, please raise your hand. I'm going to start with one. We'll grab one or two more, and then we're very quickly going to go ahead and get our speaking panel up here. My biggest question, I think I'd love a little softball to toss out to you, Barry, but in the top of your head, if there are 5 top performing states right now that are really doing a great job of bringing new projects in and driving their economies forward, how many of those top 5 performing states, and feel free to list a few, also have very aggressive site readiness programs that their state and localities are working together on?
Yeah, I would say most of them have them. I'm actually calling in from, I'm based in New York, but I'm actually calling in from North Carolina. Today, North Carolina has a great certified site program. Actually, they also have 2 utilities that also have certified site programs. So some sites are actually utility certified and they're state certified. And so you can see that just the more certification, once again, the quicker it is to get up and running and the less risk in the site. In North Carolina, it's not, you know, like Texas or California or anything like that, but it's still a sizable, but it ends up in the top 5 almost any poll every year of getting deals. So that's just one familiar with as that I'm here today.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome to come out and visit us too. Did anybody else have any questions for Barry on the topic here? Because I'm actually really impressed the technology has continued to work and go so well. Well, I appreciate your insight and your analysis, Barry. We're also taking a look again at what other states are investing, at different programs they have in, and as you know, while AREA is not a lobbying organization, we are a 501c3. We are very excited to advocate for the need for investment, proactive investment in public infrastructure at the government level so that we can get things done. So I don't know if you have any other comments on that. Otherwise, I'll let you say goodbye.
Well, I think that's a wonderful, once again, this integrated ecosystem is very important. The fact that you're caring about sites, you know, that you're working with the product and making sure your product is there. I know you guys also help out with the talent and workforce issues. So all of that work is just amazing in a payoff of then getting into the EDO and really kind of producing the results that the community wants. And, you know, at the end of the day, and I think we lose sight of this, is all of this work we're doing is really just to help the citizens of the community. It's to provide more opportunities for them and actually to provide more revenue, hopefully to the government, so they can provide more services and improve the product. So I appreciate all you're doing there. I've been out there, I guess, once or twice in the last year. So we'd love to come visit again. We'll probably see you soon. So good to see you.
Thanks, Barry. Absolutely. Appreciate your time today, especially while you're traveling.
Good.
All right, we are going to transition over really quickly. So I'll let Daniel do his beautiful work here. We're going to move some chairs around. Look at this crack team. We're just on it.